Hey there, it's Lizzie McGuire in Professor Caicco's Art Since 1945 class. This is part 3 of our final project for this class. Today I'm going to be talking about the role of exterior influences and inspiration as it pertains to an artist's message, and I'll be looking at 3 specific pieces that are great examples of this. To start things out, let's take a look at my thesis statement. Bacon's Study After Velázquez's Portrait of Pope Innocent, Lichtenstein's Drowning Girl, and Galizio's industrial painting all present an example of how acknowledging and engaging with exterior inspiration can alter and strengthen an artist's message. Basically, these pieces are all great examples of how artists can use influences to make their message stronger. So since we're examining the role of outside events and inspiration, I think it's important to first give some background on the concept of originality and how that influences the way these pieces were created. So originality, what is it? I think the first response many people have is something that hasn't existed before. But there's a strong argument for the idea that there is nothing new under the sun, or that all ideas simply build on previous ones. Mark Twain once wrote a letter to Helen Keller: "All ideas are second-hand, consciously and unconsciously drawn from a million outside sources." But the appeal of creating original artwork remains and has its advantages. Presenting the audience with something they've never seen before can gain certain reactions. There are many works that exist today that try their hardest to remain as original as possible. But what happens when works are created specifically to use these outside sources to their advantage? What happens when an artist, instead of trying to create work in the vacuum of their brain, purposely recognizes and incorporates these outside ideas that influence their work? That's what we'll be looking at today. So first, let's take a look at a piece that is quite obviously straddling the controversial line of originality and plagiarism: Lichtenstein's 1963 work, Drowning Girl. This is considered appropriation artwork because the image was not a product of the artist's own mind, but rather a completely different work. The original work was a comic book panel created by Tony Abruzzo from the comic book Run for Love, part of the Secret Hearts comic series. Lichtenstein took this piece, cropped and copied it almost exactly, save for changing the dialogue and some style changes. This piece examines popular art and delves into a commentary about mechanized reproduction of art. There are several advantages to recognizing the outside influence of Abruzzo in this work, but the main idea is that the artwork literally becomes the conversation surrounding his message. What better way to begin a dialogue about mechanized reproduction than literally reproducing a piece of art that already exists? If Lichtenstein were to try to create a more original piece of artwork, it may get his message across, but it wouldn't be as impactful. Additionally, back when this piece was created, the original Abruzzo work would be very recognizable, and people would immediately know that Lichtenstein had copied the work. This started a direct conversation about the ethicality of his work and if it was plagiarism. If the piece had been more original, it may not have had as much of an immediate effect on people. He could have done it in the same style as the original, but people may have just looked at it without really examining the message surrounding the piece. But by directly referencing and presenting his outside influences, Lichtenstein starts a conversation surrounding his work that may not have been achieved had he done something more original. Now let's take a look at a piece that is similar to Lichtenstein's work, but in a different manner. Galizio's industrial painting is not a copy of an existing work, but relies heavily on outside events and influences to get the message across. During the time this piece was created, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Machines were starting to take over the workforce and mass production was on the rise. To make a comment about the state of production and consumption, Galizio created industrial painting. He invented a painting machine, a contraption meant to mimic the mass production machines of the time. The machine painted a long canvas automatically. Later on, when the canvas was shown at a gallery in Paris, it was cut and sold by the meter to patrons. This parody of the production and consumerism of the time would not be possible if Galizio hadn't completely embraced the outside inspiration stemming from the current events of the time. The work itself is not a subtle commentary, but rather a direct reference to a world event. Although this piece is quite original compared to the previous work, it still does not shy away from its influence. The piece literally becomes the conversation, much like the Lichtenstein work. Galizio is mimicking the machines of the time by designing a work that was literally mass-produced. If he had not completely delved into this process, maybe the work would have carried a strong message, but it would not be as impactful as the process of literally using a machine to make a canvas. His work is strengthened by outside influence because his work becomes the conversation around his opinion on consumerism and mass production in the industrial age. The last piece we'll look at today is Bacon's study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent. This piece is similar to the Liechtenstein work, as Bacon used an existing work to inspire his painting. The original work is a painting made by Diego Velázquez in 1650. As you can see, the original is made to look stately and professional, and to capture the Pope's likeness with as much accuracy as possible. In comparison, Bacon's piece is frightening and energetic, quite the opposite of the original. Bacon used this artwork as a reference for many other pieces, as he was very drawn to the work. Little is known about Bacon's message to the audience while painting this piece, but it appears that Bacon preferred to make art for more personal reasons than for the viewer. Nevertheless, Bacon's piece is clearly meant to be sobering and a little disturbing. This is where the use and recognition of the original Velázquez piece comes into play. When we think of the Pope, we think of someone who is warm and inviting, a deeply religious and bright individual. Obviously, this is a figure that is supposed to be associated with concepts such as goodness and holiness. So when Bacon uses his likeness to create a scary image, it makes the frightening aspects seem that much more potent. If he were to just paint an anonymous figure, it would still be uncomfortable to look at and would definitely still be scary. However, by using a figure associated with the opposite, it makes his piece more potent. But obviously, he did not just use the likeness of a pope, he used a work done by another artist with the pope as a subject. Arguably, this makes his work even stronger, especially when the pieces are viewed side by side, like they are here. This is because the first piece is done with no deep interpretation linked to it. It is meant simply to capture the likeness of the Pope. But Bacon's piece is layered with themes of existential dread and terror. There is obviously some kind of meaning attached to the image. Bacon's work is made stronger by referencing this previous painting because it really emphasizes and pushes the concepts that he's painted into his interpretation. If he had not referenced a previous painting, his work would have still had an impact, but not as much as it does when taken into context of the other work. In conclusion, there are several examples of how referencing external inspiration and events strengthens the works we've seen here. Although attempting to be original can have an interesting and desirable effect on audiences, by flipping the script and deliberately recognizing pre-existing themes and ideas, it can create different conversations around the work. The messages of the artists are often made stronger by not shying away from the origins of the artist's ideas. And on the last page, here is my bibliography. Thank you guys for listening.